wealth and power are highly related. Okay, so historically, governments encouraged exports, restricted imports, and sought trade surplus so that gold and silver would flow into their country. It assumes trade is competitive between nations. One country's gain may be viewed as another country's loss. So, for this particular theory, the emphasis is on the role of the state in managing the economy and advocated for a positive balance of trade to accumulate wealth, primarily in the form of gold and what? Silver, as you have here. So the theory, or in this particular theory, a trade surplus is not profit in the same way as firms profit. A country also benefits from useful imports like machinery, medicine, technology, and inputs. So imports are not automatically harmful under this particular theory. There are key features of the mercantilism theory. First is the export promotion. Okay, so government supports domestic producers and encourage foreign sales to generate trade surplus. And then we have the import restrictions. The import restrictions. So tariffs, quotas, or prohibitions protect domestic production and reduces the outflow of precious metals. So this is what it encourages more of exports and restricts imports. We only import what is needed for production here. Okay, and then we have the colonial system. There was some form of colonialism under this particular theory. So colonies supplied raw materials and served as controlled markets for manufactured exports from the colonial power. So this was what the British and the Dutch and the Portuguese people were doing to us. We hardly export, or let's say, they hardly import from us, but they bring to us and take our precious precious metals to accumulate their country's wealth. So they took a lot of our gold and all that. Then we have the wealth accumulation. Okay, gold and silver reserves were treated as evidence of national wealth and security then. And then lastly, we have the states or strong state regulations, like government regulations. So government directed trade, shipping, and industry to serve national objectives. These are some of the key aspects of the mercantilism. Now let's look at the advantages of this particular theory, advantages of mercantilism. First of all, we have the economic growth and national wealth. The economic growth and the national wealth. So there is accumulated reserves that could finance state activities, infrastructure, and military capacity. Okay. The wealth that are accumulated from the exports, the gold, the silver, the precious metals, it could finance state activities, infrastructure, and military capacities of these particular countries. Okay. Protection could give emerging domestic industries time to build skills and productive capability, because we have still we have strict rules and regulations for imports. Okay, the local producers have the time to develop and build skills to produce to their capabilities. Okay, so they don't get threats from export of goods that they are also producing. Export orientation could encourage production, productivity, and the development of shipping and trade routes. Since this particular theory encourages what we call export of goods and services. That particular orientation gives the producers in this particular country the capacity, okay, and the expertise to produce and ship to different routes. It gives them the platform to have the international presence for their goods and services. And then there is also control over strategic trade routes that could strengthen national security and bargaining power. So these are some of the advantages of the mercantilism. When you read the slides, you will find a lot of these advantages explained. I've just summarized them, but they are practically the same. And then we have the disadvantages of mercantilism. The disadvantages. First of all, we have the colonial exploitation. So resources and labor were extracted for the colonizing power as at that time, and pro- producing persistent inequality and institutional damage. So because they had a lot of power, they were draining resources from the people they were colonizing, which created inequalities. And then we have restricted free trade. Restricted free trade. So tariffs and quotas reduced choice, increased price, and also allocated resources inefficiently, because we are not getting imports from other producers who are not in the country to compete with the people that we have here. We are controlling the markets, let me put it that way. So prices were so high, or prices are mostly high when you are using this particular theory to run your country. We also have the retaliations. The retaliations. So other countries respond with their own restrictions, creating trade conflicts and shrinking markets. Since you don't want us to import, other countries will also restrict, and so it will be difficult for our goods to also be exported. That is how it works. And then we have the suppressed industrialization. Suppressed industrialization. Colonies may be locked into exporting raw materials and importing manufactured goods. So this was what they were doing to us. They pick our goods, then they'll bring us, sorry, they pick our goods and they'll bring us sardines, mirror, oil, food. That was what they were doing to us. And then we have the resource depletion. Resource depletion. So there's short-term extraction that can damage ecosystem and weaken long-term productive capacity. Overexploitation kind of destroy the environment that we have. Currently, as we speak, we are somehow being colonized by the Chinese. They give us loans, and so we can't sack their people from extracting from us. They are doing low-key colonization. Now we want to teach their language in our schools and all that. This is how it starts. They bring us fake mattresses and all that, and then we allow them to take all the precious. They have a lot of minerals in their country. We don't have more than them, but you can't do what they are doing to us in their country. That is what it means. They've overexploited the country and they've taken out almost, and now they are one of the leading cocoa producers in the world. Our seeds used to be special. We had a taste for our cocoa, our coffee, and some of our cash plants. Okay, now it's on our minerals. They will exploit and exploit and exploit. The Americans and the Australians also came in with the lithium and all that. So this is how low-key underdeveloped countries are overexploited. We have the concentrated gains. Political and commercial elites may capture benefits while workers and consumers bear the cost. This is very obvious. And then there is what we call instability. Dependence on few exports makes the economy vulnerable to failing external demands or prices. So our economy is not stable because we can't even export a lot of skills. We are over dependent on few produce that we export. And so whenever there is an external influence, the financial market is not stable. Our economy is hit by it. Now we move to the next theory that is called the theory of absolute advantage. The theory of absolute advantage. So for this particular theory from Adam Smith, it states that a country should specialize in a good it can produce using fewer resources or at a lower cost than another country. So if each country specializes where it is absolutely more efficient and then trades, total output can increase. Total output can increase. So, for example, let's say country A can produce 10 units of wheat with the same amount of resources that country B uses. Country, country B will produce 5 units of wheat. So here, country A has the absolute advantage in wheat production. Country A has absolute advantage in wheat production because if we all have the same resources and I can produce 10 and you can produce 5, I am more efficient. In the same way, if country B can produce 20 units of cloth with the same resources that country A uses to produce 10 units, then country B has an absolute advantage in cloth production. So in this particular theory, let us stick to the one we are mostly efficient in producing. So we can say from this example that country A will specialize in producing wheat, whilst country B will specialize in producing what cloth, so that we can exchange our products. That is how this works. Now, this particular theory has advantages. First of all, one of the advantage here is specialization. So specialization directs land, labor, and capital towards the more productive use of the resources we are talking about here. For example, the wheat and the cloth. A has upper hand in producing wheat. B has upper hand in producing cloth. So when we specialize, we direct our land, our labor, and capital towards the most productive use. And then there is higher productivity increase. Okay, when we look at the absolute advantage, higher productivity increases total output and may lower production cost and consumer price. Same resources, I'm producing 10, you are producing what, 5? Meaning I use less cost as compared to you, because if you have to match up to my 10, you may need additional resources. And so when we stick to the ones that we efficiently produce well, we reduce or we cut down production costs and consumer prices becomes affordable. Okay. Expanding efficient industries can also create employment and support economic growth. That is what this theory offers. And then lastly, there is deep specialization, which may stimulate learning, process improvement, and technological innovation. When you do one thing continuously over a period of time, you develop the skills to even do that particular thing within a short possible time. You can learn a lot of stuff to improve these skills, and that is what this theory talks about. Now let's move to the disadvantages of the theory of absolute cost advantage. So it assumes away transport costs, trade barriers, and many coordination costs. So when we pick this particular theory, it's more about the direct costs of production. Other costs that are incurred when getting our goods to our consumers are not considered. Not just transportation cost, importation cost and all that. They don't form part of the production cost. They are just, let's say, overhead costs or something, not direct costs. Few things need to be considered, miscellaneous and all that. But this particular theory just assumes that costs in producing are solely the ones that are directly linked to the production of the goods and services. And that makes the estimate wrong, because you can't say I'm doing sobolo and so the cost involved is just the ingredients, the charcoal, and the bottles I will use, and probably the electricity to freeze them. Going to the market comes with its costs. Okay, getting the product to the market also comes with additional costs. In fact, packaging and all are all part of the cost, but this particular theory neglects all these things. It does not compare opportunity costs, so it cannot fully explain trade when one country is more efficient in every product. Forgoing the cost of producing clothes to specialize in just the sobolo, there's an opportunity cost here. You've forgone, or you've given up some costs so you can do something else. And you have to consider all these things in pricing of your goods and services. But when we look at this particular theory, we neglect all that. And then we have over-specialization that exposes countries to demand shocks, commodity price changes, and what we call technological disruptions. There is also gains that may be distributed unequally across countries and groups within a country. The price for cloth and the price for wheat will not be the same. One country may be richer than the other. Okay. For wheat is food, so the demand will constantly be there. But cloth, I can buy cloth today and decide to use it for some period before I buy another cloth. So the sales and the monies, all these things will not be equal. Expanding the most efficient extractive activity can still cause resource depletion and environmental harm. If yours is about cloth and you may have to extract, because you are specializing, you will extract and extract and extract and still harm the environment. So that is also for absolute cost advantage. Now we move to what we call theory of comparative advantage. Theory of comparative advantage. So the comparative advantage is based on relative opportunity cost, not simply on which country produces more. The country has comparative advantage in the good for which it gives up less of another good. So this explains how the trade can benefit two countries even when one has absolute advantage in both goods. So for absolute advantage, you ask who produces more. But for comparative advantage, you ask who gives up less. Who gives up less? The first one, which is the absolute cost, we look at who produces more. And then the comparative advantage, we are looking at who gives up less. Okay. So it's all about opportunity cost. It's all about opportunity cost. Now, the principles for the comparative advantage, first of all, as I said, is opportunity cost. We have opportunity cost, we have specialization, and then we have trade. So opportunity cost is the value of the next best alternative forgone. Resources devoted to one product cannot simultaneously produce another. Countries should compare these sacrifices, specialize relatively and not necessarily completely, and trade on favorable items. So let's look at the examples. Suppose country A is better at producing both wine and cloth than country B. However, country A has a comparative advantage in producing wine because the opportunity cost of producing wine is lower than that of producing cloth. And then we come to country B, which has a comparative advantage in producing cloth because it sacrifices less wine production when it produces cloth. So according to this particular theory, country A will specialize in wine, country B will specialize in cloth, and they should trade with each other to maximize their combined output. It's not so different from the absolute cost, just that here we consider opportunity cost. So if foregoing the cloth is actually less, the cost involved is less to forego, then it is better to forego. But if the cost involved was high, then you may have to consider adding that to your product line. So that is how that one also works. We have implications for comparative advantage. So the theory provides efficient argument for trade. Specialization according to relative cost can expand. Okay, and the total quantity available for consumption as well. And how what it is that aggregate gains do not guarantee that every worker, firm, region, or country gains equally. Now let's look at the disadvantages or criticisms of comparative advantage. It also considers no transportation costs. Okay, so when you are exporting, issues on freight, insurance, delays, and spoilage can eliminate the expected cost advantage. They don't consider all those things. And then we have perfect competition. It is assumed that the market is so perfect, but in reality, we have imperfect markets. So large firms, cartels, subsidies, information gap, and market power influences price and gains. That is what's happening in real world. Okay. There is full employment and easy adjustment. So there's here the assumption is that everybody is fully employed and we can easily make an adjustment. But in real world situations, we have displaced workers that may lack the skills in production. Okay. Location or time needed to move into expanding industries are also quite different. They are all different issues altogether. Not everything is so perfect. Okay. The theory also assumes that there is static technology and resources, but that is not the case. We have learning, investment, and policy that can also create new advantages. We have countries that are not permanently confined to current specializations. There are a lot of changes in plants and machineries that we are using. It is becoming too sophisticated and all that. So these are some of the assumptions or critics under the comparative cost advantage theory. When you take your time to read the slides, you would really get what I'm trying to say. I don't know why today most of us are not in class and nobody has spoken to me about anything. I have shared the topics for presentation from next week and next 2 weeks to your course rep. So please make sure your group is well prepared for the presentation next week and next 2 weeks. We move to the next, that is the factor endowment trade theory. Factor endowment trade theory. So the Heckscher-Ohlin or factor endowment theory here states that another name for factor endowment theory is the Heckscher-Ohlin. Okay. This theory argues that countries export goods that intensively uses factors they possess relatively abundantly and import these goods that intensively use relatively scarce factors. So here it is talking about the use of factor of production to produce and export. And the factors of production, they are land, labor, capital. Now we have technology, entrepreneur and all that as part of factors of production. Okay, so the relevant factors include land, labor, capital, and in modern application, as I said, skills and knowledge, entrepreneurship, and all that. A capital abundant economy is expected to be competitive in capital intensive products, while a labor abundant economy may be competitive in labor intensive products. So if your country has more labor, it is assumed that whatever you are producing will be more labor intensive products. And if it is pure capital, it will be more capital intensive. Okay, so abundance is relative. A country can have many workers but still be capital abundant if its capital to labor ratio is higher than another country's. That is what this means. And we have factors under this particular theory. I've explained the factor endowment part. And then we have the factor price equalization. So the theory predicts that trade raises demand for a country's abundant factor and reduces relative demand for its scarce factor. So wages and returns on capital may therefore move closer across trading countries. So although complete equalization is unlikely because technology, institutions, productivity, migrations, and trade barriers are different among countries. We have implications for the factor endowments. We have example here. We have implications for this particular theory. So trade can improve global resources allocation by matching production with relatively factor abundance. Okay, so for policy, the theory also highlights distribution. That is, owners of the abundant factor may benefit more, while owners of scarce factor may experience what you call pressure. Now let's look at the critics of the factor endowment theory. In reality, productivity can differ even when countries possess similar amount of labor and capital. But with this particular theory, it talks about different technology. That is not how it works. The theory also talks about international factor mobility. Okay, international factor mobility. But in reality, capital moves through FDI and portfolio flows, while migration changes labor availability. So not everything is static. And then it also looks at transport and trade barriers. Okay, they don't consider some of these costs, as the other theories also do not consider. But in real world, transportation costs, insurance, all these ones contribute to cost of production or the final price of the goods you are exporting. We also have what we call different demand or differences in demand. The culture, income preferences determine what consumer wants and not only what countries can supply. So if you can supply this and the demand is not there, you are supplying in vain. So it's not about what your factor of production is and what it can produce. In real world, production is based on demand for specific things. That is what some of the critics under the factor endowment theory. And then lastly, we look at the impact of economic distribution. There is an unequal income effect, yes. The theory assumes that economic efficiency and what do you call it? It assumes that the gains from the trade are shared broadly across society. So what we produce, whatever we get, it is shared across board. But that is not how things works in real world situations. Okay. Trade may increase returns to an abundant factor while placing pressure on scarce factor. So this is it for the country-based theories. Now we move to what we call the firm-based theories. Firm-based theories. These are lessons from the country-based theories. So we move to what we call the firm-based theories. For the firm-based theories, we have the International Product Life Cycle Theory. International Product Life Cycle Theory. So the theory focuses on how a product's production location and export patterns shift as it moves through its life cycle. So it is particularly relevant for understanding the dynamics of trade in innovation products and the global spread of technology. And there are stages to these product life cycles. The first stage is the introduction stage. For the introduction stage, there is innovation and production that remains near the lead market because please hold on, I think one of your colleagues. Okay. So um introduction stage, yeah. So for the introduction stage, innovation and production remain near the lead market because design changes are frequent and communication with customers is important. So you are the initial stage of production. So the concentration is more in the home country, trying to get to the, what do you call it, the international stage. And then the next stage is the growth stage. So here, demand spreads to similar foreign markets. Exports rise and some foreign production may begin to reduce delivery costs. That is for the growth stage. And then the next stage is the maturity stage. So for the maturity, the product and process becomes standardized, okay? Cost competition grows and production may shift towards lower cost. locations. And then we have the decline stage, where production is concentrated in efficient, low-cost locations, while the original market may import the mature products and move to newer technologies. So that is how the stages for the international product life cycle is. Now I may have to mute. And then we have the implications for the international product life cycle theory. So product life cycle do not all follow the same sequence or remain in each stage for similar periods. Innovation now occurs in emerging as well as advanced economies, including the fragile innovation design for resource-constrained markets. Also, we have global value chains that divide designs, okay, divide components, assembly, and services among several countries simultaneously, rather than shifting production in a neat straight line. So it will not follow introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Not all products will decline. Some will have a sustained growth, get to maturity, and that will be all. It will still be in the system. Some will fade away even at the introductory stage, and some will get lost even at the growth stage. Okay. Automation can reduce the importance of low wages and encourage nearshoring or reshoring. And then multinational location decisions also reflect tax, regulation, risk, supply clusters, and proximity to markets. And then we move to what we call, so I'll explain the critics. We move to what we call the Potter's Diamond model. Potter's Diamond model. So the model proposes that national prosperity is created, not inherited, and that the competitiveness of industries within a country depends on 4 interrelated factors, forming a diamond shape. Forming a diamond shape. So 1, diamond condition. One condition is the factor condition. And for the factor condition, we are looking at basic factors that include location and natural resources. Advanced factors include specialized skills, research, logistics, and digital infrastructure. Then advanced factors are created and are often more suitable. That is for the factor conditions. And then we move to the diamond conditions. The sophisticated domestic customers pressure firms to improve quality, design, and then performance before competing abroad. And then we have the related and supporting industries. Related and supporting industries. So here, there is strong local suppliers, universities, logistics, providers, and complementary industries for productive clusters and accelerate innovation. And then lastly is the firm strategy, structure, and rivalry. So management practices and intense domestic cooperation forces firms to become efficient, differentiated, and innovative. That is for the diamond model. So the 4 conditions reinforce one another. Natural resources alone rarely creates lasting competitiveness. Productive capability, institutions, learning, and rival turn resources into value or valuable products. Now let's look at the critics for the Potter's Diamond. So the factors are not equally important in every industry or country, okay? The model emphasizes the home environment and may understate global supply chains. foreign ownership, and as well as international institutions. There is also small developing countries that may depend heavily on external demands, FDI, and regional integration because domestic scale is limited. Same way, government and chance events are recognized but not fully integrated, although policy and shocks can reshape an industry rapidly. Then lastly, the model can appear static unless managers explicitly analyze continuous technological and market change. So this is the critique for Potter's diamond. And then we move to what we call the country similarity theory. The country similarity theory. So for this particular theory, Lenders, proposed by Lenders, okay, Lender, Linder. Linder's country similarity reasoning explains why countries with similar income, development, and preferences often trade differentiated versions of the same product. So this is intra-industry trade. For example, two advanced economies both export and import vehicles because brand features and customer taste differs. So we have similar home demand that makes foreign customers easier for firm to understand. There is also the fact that the theory explains differentiated manufactured trade better than primary commodity trade. And then it is less powerful for trade between countries with very different income and production structures. Then lastly, global firms and value chains can create trade patterns that are not explained by similarity alone. So this is the country similarity theory. Now let's look at global strategic rivalry theory. So the global strategic rivalry focuses on how firms in concentrated industries use innovation, scale, branding, intellectual property, pricing, investment, and political strategies to create and defend advantage. Each major firm's action depends on how it expects rivals to respond. So research and development is one of the strategic action, and the purpose is that it creates differentiated products, reduce costs, or establish technological leadership. And then another strategy is economies of scale. So there is spread fixed costs over large outputs, and then this make entry very difficult for others. And then we have the branding and marketing. Why is this thing going fast? We have the branding and marketing. So they build loyalty and they reduce price comparison. We also have the intellectual property protection. That is the delay imitation and appropriate returns from innovation. And then the policy influence here, that is standards. It seeks standards, subsidies, or trade rules that can improve the firm's competitive position. So this is for the global rivalry strategy. Some of the criticisms is that the theory may overemphasize the role of strategic behavior and neglect other factors influencing competition, such as market demand and global economic conditions. And then the importance of international trade as well. So for The theories we have spoken about: trade expands markets and can support productivity, growth, and structural information. It also gives consumers and firms access to goods, services, technology, and inputs not efficiently at home. Trade may lead to licensing, joint ventures, and FDI as relationships deepen. And then lastly, imports create competitive pressure and adjust costs as well as benefits. Constructive responses, including upgrade skills, productivity, and social protection, rather than ignoring affected groups. So these are some of the importance of the international trade theories that we have spoken about for today in session 2 under unit 3. Now we move to international investments. International investments. So for international investments, we have two types. We have the foreign portfolio investment and then the foreign direct investment. Foreign portfolio investment and then foreign direct investment. Um, I will give ourselves 5 minutes break. After 5 minutes, so we will come back at exactly 8 o'clock. We come back at exactly 8 o'clock. Okay, so let's continue. We have international portfolio investment and international foreign direct investment. So here, the two dimensions, let me explain them quickly. When it comes to assets, foreign portfolio investment looks at foreign shares, bonds, and other financial securities. And then FDI looks at productive assets or ownership interests in a foreign enterprise. And then the primary purpose for foreign portfolio investment is financial return and portfolio diversification, whilst FDI looks at long-term strategic presence and influence or control. Now, in terms of management, FPI is normally passive, no active control of the issuer. And then for FDI, investor participates in or controls the operations. In terms of liquidity, it is often easier to buy and sell FPI. And then FDI, it is less liquid because factories, subsidiaries, and relationships cannot be exited instantly. And then in terms of risk, for FPI, we have market, currency, interest rate, and sovereign risk. And then for FDI, we have political, operational, cultural, market, and asset specific risk. So these are some of the differences between FPI and FDI. Okay, so for FDI, think I have explained this one. So for FDI, we have some forms. We have the horizontal FDI. So for horizontal FDI duplicates the firm's home country activity at the same stage of the value chain in another country. Okay, it is usually market seeking. The firm wants to serve local customers, reduce transport, reduce transport costs, and then follow competitors or overcome import barriers. So we have example here where a US fast food chain opens restaurants in various European, like you can read from here. And then we have the vertical FDI. So the vertical FDI, we have two. We have the backward vertical FDI and the forward FDI. When we pick the backward FDI, it is towards input and earlier stages, okay, to secure raw materials or components. So for example, a manufacturer investing in a foreign input supplier. And then we have the forward FDI. The forward FDI or forward vertical FDI is towards distribution and later stages. That is, it controls sales, distribution, or services. So an example is establishing a foreign dealership or retail outlets. So that is for the vertical and horizontal FDI. Now we have theories of foreign direct investment. Theories of foreign direct investment. One is ownership advantage theory. Ownership advantage theory. So foreign firms face a liability of foreigners, sorry. Foreign firms, they face a liability of foreigners, their own familiar laws, culture, customers, and networks. So ownership advantages are firm-specific assets that are strong enough to offset this disadvantage. They include proprietary technology, brand reputation, managerial systems, economies of scale, and financial capacity. So here you ask yourself, what does the firm possesses that a local competitor cannot easily buy or imitate? If the answer is nothing distinctive, FDI may not be justified here in this case. Okay. And then we have the Dunning's electric paradigm. Dunning's electric paradigm. So here we have what we call ownership, location, and internationalization. The paradigm looks at three things: ownership advantage, location advantage, and internalization advantage. So this particular paradigm explains why companies engage in foreign direct investment and choose to expand internationally through ownership and control of foreign operations rather than through other modes such as exporting or licensing. So for the ownership, the question here is why this firm rather than a local rival? So in terms of brand, patent, technology, managerial know-how, skill, financing, this is what the ownership advantage looks at. And then we look at the location advantage. The location advantage here, why produce or operate in this particular foreign country? We are looking at the market size, the labor, the resources, the skills, the infrastructure, the policy, the cluster, as well as what? The logistics. And then we have internationalization. Internationalization. So why own or control the activities rather than license or contract it? This one protects knowledge, assures quality, reduce contracting and monitoring costs. So the OLI, that is the ownership, the location, and internationalization decision rule, is cumulative. Here, the firm needs a transferable ownership advantage. The host country needs an attractive location advantage and internal control that must be more valuable than an arm's length arrangement. So this is it for the Dunning's electric paradigm. Okay, and then we come to the internalization theory. Internalization theory. So for the internalization theory, it explains why firms replace imperfect external markets with transactions inside the organization. So when negotiating, monitoring and enforcing contracts are costly, or when partners might misuse knowledge, the firm may prefer a wholly owned subsidiary. Okay, so there's market imperfections that make external transactions unreliable or expensive, and also internal control that can protect patents, processes, data, brand standards, and product quality. And then we also have the coordination that may improve across research, production, marketing, and then distribution. And then we have the internalization that also creates bureaucracy, capital commitment, and management complexity. So ownership is not always superior. Okay, we have reasons for the Yes, I've explained these ones. So we have reasons for the horizontal foreign direct investment here. First of all, one is to avoid, for the horizontal FDI, one is to avoid transport costs by producing near customers, okay? Overcoming market imperfection and trade barriers, follow major competition and also strategic markets, serve demands as a product spread through its life cycle. And for the vertical foreign direct investment, it is to secure inputs or distribution and increase value chain control, respond to unreliable concentrated supplier or distributor markets, reduce transaction costs, and of proprietary knowledge, and then gain by gaining on market power. But this may create competition among within the industry. Now let's look at the cost of FDI to a host country. If I am the one who is benefiting from the FDI, what are some of the costs involved? First of all, there is loss of control. First of all, there is what we call loss of control. I want to put the costs and benefits side by side. One benefit is employment, wages, and workforce development, but it comes with crowding out of acquisition of capable local firms. That is what the point is here. That's the third point. And then we have the technology, management, knowledge, and supply upgrading. That is the benefit. When there is foreign direct investment, I benefit from technology, management knowledge, and supplier upgrading. But it comes with what we call limited spillovers in foreign affiliated remains that are isolated. Okay. And then we also have the capital, infrastructure, export, and productivity. These are some of the benefits. But what happens at the end of the day? Profit repatriation and import dependency may reduce net foreign exchange gains. Another benefit is tax revenue and economic activity. But the potential cost or disadvantage is that tax incentives, avoidance, or weak enforcement may reduce public benefits. And then lastly, we have the consumer choice and stronger competition. And this leads to what you call environmental harm, labor concerns, or loss of control in strategic sectors. So FDI is not automatically developmental or exploitative. There is net benefits that depends on the sector, the investor behavior, the local relationships or linkage, the regulation, the tax design, domestic capability, and also the environmental and labor safeguards. Okay, that is it. And then we have, so I've explained the benefits as against the costs. And then we have the cost of FDI to home country. The cost of FDI to home country. I also do it side by side. So the potential benefits, we have higher profits and access to rapidly growing markets. Higher profits and access to rapidly growing markets. The potential cost is that domestic jobs loses if production is relocated rather than expanded. And then another benefit here is access to resources, technology, and learning. The potential cost is that capital outflow and exposure to foreign political and market risk is high. Okay, is high. And then another potential benefit here is stronger global competitiveness and skill. And then the potential cost is that the domestic capabilities may weaken if critical activities move abroad. And then lastly, we have export of components and professional services to affiliates. The potential cost here is that import from affiliates may worsen some trade balance, like those imports may worsen some trade balance measures. So these are some of the cost and benefits of FDI to a home country. Now let's look at reasons for foreign direct investment. Why do countries need foreign direct investment? First of all, we need it to increase profit and sales by accessing additional customers. Okay. Secondly, we also want to enter rapidly growing markets before competitors establish strong positions. So we will need more investment in terms of capital, in terms of human resource. Okay. And then FDI is important because it reduces production, logistics, tax, or transaction cost while considering total landed and coordination costs. Okay. It also protects the domestic market by matching global competitors or securing supplies. When we get in more investment, we expand and then becomes competitive. It also helps us acquire technology, brands, skills, or managerial know-how through acquisition and learning. That is how FDI helps, or that is how important FDI is. And then lastly, FDI helps diversify risk across markets whose demand and economic cycles are not perfectly correlated. So we will look at the bypassing tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade. So a firm may establish local production, use lawful local content, operate in an authorized free zone, or form a legitimate alliance to serve a protected market. Such tariff jumping FDI replaces exports with local operations. So here the question is that product reclassification is acceptable only when it is accurately following custom rules. Deliberately misclassification, false origin declaration, or sham local content arrangements are customs fraud, not legitimate strategy. So here we are looking at strategies that companies use to avoid or minimize the impact of trade restrictions imposed by government, and I have mentioned some of these things. Now let's move to regional and economic integrations. Regional and economic integrations, or sorry, regional economic integration. So regional economic integrations occurs when neighboring or partner countries reduce barriers and adopt shared rules governing trade and at deeper levels, services like capital, like labor, like regulations or a currency. Okay, so integration exists on a continuum rather than as an all or nothing coordination. Why do countries promote regional integration? Why do they want the regional integration? It opens larger markets for firms in these member countries. Okay, it also increases competition and potentially lower prices and expand choice. It stimulates regional trade, investment, and cross-border supply chains, and also reduces cost through common rules, scale, and more predictable border procedures. Regional economic integration also strengthens foreign policy cooperation and also collective bargaining power. And it also attracts non-member FDI seeking access to integrated regional markets. So integration may shift imports from a more efficient non-member producer to a less efficient member protected by the common external agreement. This is called trade diversion, increased trade among efficient members. So we can use ECOWAS, we can use EU. I don't know about the Asian. I think they have. These are some of the regional economic integrations. For ECOWAS, yes, but for the whole of Africa, I can't really tell. Even ECOWAS, we are struggling with integration. ECOWAS, we are really struggling with integration. So we have levels of integration. First is the free trade. So for the free trade, tariffs are quoted on, what do you call it? qualifying intra-members trade are removed, okay? Each member retains its own trade policy towards non-members' rules or origin that are necessary. And then we also have a customs union. So there is internal trade barriers. That is common external tariff or common trade policy towards non-members. It is very common in the EU. Then we have the common market, where there are barriers to goods and services. So there is freer movement of labor and capital. This is also common in EU. And then we have the economic union, where there is common market barriers. So coordination or harmonization of import economic policies may include a shared currency. So EU has one currency they use, that is the euros, with the exception of 1 or 2 or 3 European countries that spend their own currency. But even that, the EU is still used in this the euros are still used in this country interchangeably with their local currencies. And then we have the political union. That is the deep economic barrier. So there is shared political institutions or authorities over selected policy areas. We have some of the examples of the regional groupings. As I said, ECOWAS, the West African Regional Community, pursuing economic integration alongside political and security operations. We also have the West African Economic and Monetary Union, that is the UEMOA. Okay, and then so that UEMOA or WAEMU, the West African Economic and Monetary Union, theirs is with a common currency among participating states. We are not yet there, but we have the union. Then we have the WAMS, that's the West African Monetary Zone. The initiative is for the non-West African people or countries and do not present a proposed common currency as already operational. We have the European Union. This is a deep regional union with a single market. Many, but not all members use the euro. Just 1 or 2 people that don't use the euro. We'll probably Czech Republic. I know for Czech. Switzerland, yes. Probably majority of them use the euros though. And then we have the USMCA. That is for the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. And then they replace the NAFTA. And then we have the Asian, that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And then, so is this. Then we have the EFTA and the Mercosur or whatever, yeah. And then we have AFTA, actually, that is the African Continental Free Trade Agreements, yes. So these are some of the regional economic groupings that we have. Now let's look at the implications of regional integrations. So firms inside the bloc can internationalize more easily across member markets, okay? And then 2, companies may rationalize operations by consolidating plants, warehouses, or support functions to serve the region efficiently. And then 3, there is larger markets that encourage mergers and acquisition and may intensify competition. We also have businesses that may design regional products and marketing while retaining necessary local adaptation. And then lastly, firms outside the bloc may export, partner, or invest inside it to avoid discrimination and gain market access. Now let's look at economic partnership agreements. So economic partnership agreements are reciprocal trade and development arrangements negotiated between the European Union and groups of Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific countries. They were designed to replace older non-reciprocal preferences with arrangements that are intended to be what? Compatible with multilateral trade rules. There are key elements of this EP. There are key elements of this EP. One is the concept of reciprocity. Okay, partners in the region progressively open selected markets to EU goods rather than receiving one-way preferences only. And then we have the special treatment. Here there is longer transition periods, exclusions, safeguards, and developments that supports what you call development support that may recognize differences in capacity and vulnerability among the groups. Then we have the predicted impact. So for the predicted impact, there is potential export access, investments and reforms benefits that must be weighed against tariff, revenue loss, import competition, adjustment costs, and also regional coherence concerns. These are the main elements of EPAs, that's the Economic Partnership Agreement. And then we have trade restriction instruments, instruments that we use to restrict trade. One is the tariff, okay? The tariff here is a tax on imports that raises their domestic price and generates government revenue. And then we have subsidy. Subsidy here is government financial support that lowers domestic producers' costs or encourages production or exporting. It can distort competition. That is for subsidies. Then we have what you call import quota. Import quota. So it's a quantitative limit on imports. Scarcity may raise prices here and also create quota rents. And then we also have local content requirements. Local content requirements. So here there is a specified share of inputs or value that must be sourced locally. It may support industry, but also increase cost or conflict with trade rules. And then we have voluntary export restraints. Voluntary export restraints. So an exporting country limits shipments usually under pressure from the importing country. And then we also have the administrative policy. Here there is standards, licensing, inspection, or procedures that may protect legitimate objectives, but can also become hidden barriers. And then we have anti-dumping duties. Anti-dumping duty. So this is a remedy duty that is imposed after investigation when like goods or exported, like there are goods that are exported below normal value and they cause material injury under applicable rules. So here it should have been export quota. Sorry. Yeah. And then we have forms of and then claims of dumping. Okay. In strict trade law usage, dumping concerns export pricing below a defined normal value. Okay, and it requires formal investigation before the anti-dumping action. So one major issue is the environmental dumping. That is when there's an allegation that weak environmental standards create an unfair cost advantage. We also have the social dumping, where there's an allegation that there's low labor standards or poor working conditions that create an unfair competition. There is also the financial service dumping, also where there is weak prudential requirements, subsidies, or advantage financial firms. And then we have the cultural dumping. That is a contested label for market advantage associated with cultural protection or asymmetry. So these broader labels are politically contested and are not automatically equivalent to legal dumping. Low wages alone do not prove unfair trade. Productivity, living costs, rights, enforcement, and pricing evidence are all considered in what you call dumping. Now let's look at the political arguments for trade intervention. Political arguments for trade intervention. We have the protecting domestic jobs. Protecting domestic jobs. The rationale behind this is to slow import-related job loss and preserve communities, okay? This protection may raise consumer cost and also delay adjustment. These are some of the risks that comes with this particular argument. And then we have the national defense. The national defense. So here, the idea is to maintain capability in strategically essential goods and technology. But what is the risk? You define strategic narrowly to prevent every industry claiming protection. And then we also have the retaliation. So for the retaliation, the pressure is the rationale is to pressure another country to remove unfair restrictions, like the way China and US were doing to themselves. The risk here is that escalation can produce a costly trade war. Trump had to go there and go and negotiate with China so that they will not get to the escalation point. That is the political argument for trade intervention. When we look at the economic argument also, we have the infant industry. Okay, temporarily protects a promising new sector until it achieves learning and skill. The risk here is that the protection needs clear performance condition and an exit date. We don't have to say we are protecting you and so you just be enjoying from the protection when you are not living up to expectation or you are not performing so well. That was it for Kantanka Automobiles. He was given a lot of things, tax-free and all those things, but the performance was too low and we can't just depend on you alone to have automobiles in the country. And then we have the sunset industries. For here, the rationale is to manage decline where abrupt closure would impose severe social cost. Okay, the risk here is that the support should facilitate transition, not preserve permanent inefficiency. If we are supporting you, you should transition from the bad to the good, not because we are supporting you, you are just doing things the way you want or anyhow. And then we also have the buying time to revitalize. Okay, here it gives firms time to invest, retrain, and also to restructure. The risk here is that the aid must be tied to credible upgrading rather than lobbying for power. Okay, so these are some of the instruments that we use for international trade policies. The last thing that we will do for today is to tackle Unit 4, which is the International Monetary System. International Monetary System. And this section includes the functions of the foreign exchange market, foreign exchange rate determination and forecasting, international capital markets, how the International Monetary System works, the International Monetary Fund, and then the World Bank. I will also break us for like 15 minutes. We will come back at 10:51, and then we will continue and complete for today. Please, any question before we go on break? Any
Please, it's
question?
now 8:36.
It's now 8:36, so I should continue. We need to break. Yeah. Sorry, my time is wrong. So we will come back at 8:51. Yes, 8:51. All right. So we will meet after 8:51. Hello. Um, we are back from the long break. So we were supposed to continue at 10:51. I think there's an additional 8 minutes. So kindly inform your colleagues that I'm back. So let's move to what we call the foreign exchange markets under the functions of the foreign exchange market. So the foreign exchange market is the decentralized global market where we have one currency exchanged for the other. Okay, it's two central business functions that are currency conversion and management of foreign exchange risk. So the exchange rate is simply the price of one currency expressed in another. So buying one currency always means selling another. Exchange rate therefore comes in pairs, and the direction of the quotation must always be stated. So we have banks and the foreign exchange market. Banks and authorized dealers connect customers needing currencies. So demand and supply arise from imports, exports, travel, education, medical payments, pensions, remittances, gifts, and cross-border investments. Banks also quote rates, executive transfers, provide forward contracts, and also manage their own currency positions. So that is what banks do in the foreign exchange market. So there are types of transactions in the foreign exchange market. We have the spot transaction and the forward transactions. So for the spot transaction, it is agreed on now, and then there is a prompt settlement and a market convention. So there is immediate conversion or payment. And then for the forward, also agreed on now at a specified future value date. And then it is locked in future rates and reduces uncertainty. So an importer ordering equipment today for payment in 90 days can agree a forward rate now. The firm gives up a possible favorable movement in exchange for certain amount about the home currency cost. So that is how the spot transaction and the forward transaction works. Now we have forward premium and then forward discount. So a currency is a set is set at a forward premium. Okay, the currency is set or is it is at a forward premium when its forward price is higher than its spot price under the chosen quotation. It is a forward discount when the forward price is lower. So premium and discounts are relative. When a currency A is set at a forward premium against currency B is at a forward discount against currency A. That is what it is. So we have an example here. The spot exchange rate for the US dollar, $1 equals 0.6 euros in 2010. So the 6-month forward exchange rate is this. This means that you can buy a dollar today for the 630, or you can agree to take it in 6 months at this particular fee. That is how the spot rate works. So there is Always you have to write the quotation before deciding the premium or discount when you are looking at some of these things. Reversing the quotes reverses the interpretation. So always you first of all state $1 equals this or one CD equals this dollar. Then you come back and look at the forward premium or the forward discount. That is how you write it, like the way I have written it here. And then we also have what we call cross rate. A cross rate derives the exchange rate between two currencies from their separate rates against a common third currency. That is what a spot rate is. So, for example, please hold on. So, for example, we assume the current exchange rate of the CD and euro, and the CD and pound is, so €1 equals 1.8. That's an assumption. One euro equals 1.8 Ghana cedis, and then £1 equals 2.2 what do you call it, Ghana cedis respectively. So we can deduce the exchange rate of the euro and pound from the given quotes, since the CD is common to the quotation. So what you do is that you do the reverse quote, and then you get the appropriate exchange rates for the two. So here, the Ghana cedis in euros divided by Ghana cedis in pound, as you can see. And then you get euro per pound. That is how it is worked out. So these are not the current exchange rates. These are just assumptions. We assume that these were the, so what you do is we have 1.8 euros. So that would be 1.8 divided by 2.20. Whatever we will get, that will be euro per pound. That is how it is worked. Now, let's look at participants in the foreign exchange market. Participants in the foreign exchange market. Sorry, I have small code. So we have traders or dealers and brokers. Traders or dealers and brokers. These are participants in the foreign exchange market. What they do is they execute customer orders, quote currencies, and also connect buyers and sellers in the market. And then we have speculators. We have speculators. So for speculators, they accept currency risk because they expect to profit from favorable price movement. That's speculators. They accept currency risk because they expect to profit from favorable price. And then we also have what you call hedges. Hedges. For hedges, they reduce an existing commercial or financial exposure, and their objective is risk control, not a bet, like what the speculators and things do. Then we have the arbitrage people. Okay. Theirs is to exploit temporary price differences across markets through offsetting transactions and helping align prices. And then we have the government and the central banks. They also hold reserves, and they may intervene or use policy to influence currency conditions and market stability. Now let's look at prices and then exchange rate. The prices and then exchange rate, that's purchasing power parity. That's the law of one price and then the PPP. So purchasing power parity here, purchasing power parity here, the law of one price says an identical tradable good should have the same price across competitive markets after conversion into one currency. So if transport costs, taxes, and barriers are absent, all items should have the same price. Purchasing power parity extends this reasoning to a basket of goods and links relative inflation to long-run exchange rate adjustments. So if prices rise consistently faster in country A than in country B, country A's currency is expected, all other things being equal, to depreciate over time. So PPP is more useful as a long-run benchmark than as a precise short-run forecast because goods differ and market contains freight, taxes, non-tradable services, and barriers. So if the law of one price were true for all goods and services, we are saying that the PPP exchange rate could be found from any individual set of prices. So by comparing the prices of identical products in different currencies, it would be possible to determine the real or the purchasing power parity exchange rate that would exist if markets were efficient. So the key word here is efficient market. And then we have interest rates, inflation, and then the Fisher's effect. Okay, so the Fisher's relationship separates a nominal interest rate into a real return and expected inflation. So a commonly used approximation is the nominal rate, which is equal to the real rate plus expected inflation. When we look at this I represents inflation. This I we see here represents, this I we see here represent the capital I here represents interest rate, also known as the nominal rate. So when we, for example, when we go to a bank and we want to borrow, there is interest rate on the borrowing, okay, or when we invest, there is interest rate on whatever we are investing. Now, this I is equal to or is made up of the real rate of whatever we are borrowing or whatever we are investing, plus inflation. This is the small I, plus the inflation. So, with a 10% real rate and 15% inflation, we are trying to say that approximately the interest rate for a loan would probably be what, 25%. So when we go for a loan and it is 25%, it is assumed, or when you ask them, they will tell you that the real rate, sometimes it is not even up to 10%. Majority of the rate is as a result of high inflation that we have. So that is the Fisher's effect. The Fisher's effect. Now, approaches to exchange rate forecast. We have, first of all, the fundamental analysis. Okay, that's why Baumia some time ago was saying when the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. What does that mean? Inflation, interest rate, growth, money balance of payments, debt policy, and political conditions are all fundamental analysis. Inflation, interest rates, growth, money, balance of payment, debt, policy, and political conditions are what we call fundamental analysis to exchange rate forecast. So if these fundamentals are weak, our exchange rate will expose us. Now, what it is that economically grounded, but the model assumption and unexpected events may reduce the accuracy of this particular statement. These are in economic theory, and these are the assumptions. It is assumed that when all these things I have mentioned are weak, we will have issues with our exchange rate. So it draws an economic theory to construct sophisticated economic models for predicting exchange rate movement. That is the fundamental analysis. When those fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate movement will have issues. So the variables I have mentioned here includes the prices of goods, that's the inflation rate, interest rate, growth, money, balance of payments. All these things contribute to the fundamental analysis of our, our exchange rate determination. And when it is weak, as I have said, as our former president said, the exchange rate will expose us. So he was not wrong anyway, just that he knew all these things. But you see, in a cons, saying it is different, implementation is also a different thing altogether. Theory will give you the whole view. In practice, it is also a different thing altogether. And then we have the technical analysis. The technical analysis. This particular one examines past price, volume, momentum, and then the chart pattern. Okay, so it may capture market behavior, but past patterns need not to persist. Okay, so this uses prices and volume data to determine past trends, which are expected to continue in the future. We look at what has happened previously in certain environmental conditions or whatever, and then we use it to predict what will happen in the next. So the please hold on. So the approach does not only rely. Why has my interface gone? So the approach does not only rely on consideration of economic fundamentals. Okay, the technical analysis is based on the premise that analyzable market trends can be used to predict future trends. So just as someone may base the analysis on the fundamentals, others may also look at the technical analysis, what has happened previously, that we can use to predict the future. So because there is no theoretical rationale for this particular assumption of predictability, many economists compare technical analysis to fortune telling. It's like you are prophesying that since 2-3 years ago, this happened. It is possible that this one, because this is not grounded in theory. And despite the skepticism or whatever, technical analysis has gained favor in recent years. So next time when we have COVID or any pandemic, technical analysis can be used in this case because we have dealt with issues like that before. We saw how the global financial space was affected. And so we can make certain predictions, not 100% predictions, but we can foretell that, okay, this and things happened some time ago, so it's likely our fuel prices or whatever prices may go high. So when the Russian-Ukraine war was at its peak, and sometimes I blame the media and some of our academics, that was the time for them to be all over the media to explain how these wars affect economies, specifically developing economies. We turn them into politics. And so when there is another war for which we will really feel the impact, it becomes difficult to say it because you will become a hypocrite. But this is how the technical analysis sometimes work. We have seen some before. There has been past trends or there have been past issues that has happened. And so we are likely to face some of these things, especially when we trade or we import from some of these big countries. So let's look at the nature of international capital markets, the nature of the international capital market. So here we have the finance type, the investor that receives, and then the business obligation. Okay, then the business obligation. So the nature, you have investors, that's the companies, the individual, the institutions. Okay, the market makers here, we have the commercial banks, the investment banks, and then who borrow? The same companies, the same individuals, and the same government. So this is how the international capital market works. So when it is debt, there's interest and payment according to the contract. So you make scheduled payments regardless of profits, subject to default and restructuring provisions. So when governments or companies are finding it difficult to pay their debts, they restructure them. Or if you are making profit or not, you constantly must what? Pay. So where you may have to restructure and pay. And then for the equity side, there's ownership claim, possible dividends, and then we have the capital gain. So there's no fixed dividend obligation, but ownership and future profits are shared. So under this, borrowers benefit from a larger pool of capital and potential lower funding costs. Investors also gain a wider opportunity. Then they set the geographic portfolio diversification here. There is also technology and financial liberalization that supports market integration and continuous trading. And then we also have the integration that can transmit shocks rapidly. So regulation, disclosure, and risk management will remain essential. Now we will end here. There are a few readings for you that will be under the International Monetary Fund, what they do, their governance, and then we have that of also the World Bank. That will be an assignment. I don't know if these areas will come into your exams. So we are done for today. That is all for units. That is all for unit 3 and then unit 4. I think today most of you are in class and that is good. So I sent the, I don't know if I can, I don't think I can share a file here. But I sent the groupings to one of you. I don't know if you have received it in your group, your group chat. Please, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please.
We can hear you.
Yes, please. Have you received the topics?
Yes, it's on the group page.
Good, thank you. So I expect that you group yourselves, and then when we meet, God willing, next week, Sunday, all the 4 groups will present. 1 hour for each. So you have 40 minutes to present. Sorry, 45 minutes to present, and then 15 minutes for class discussion. So By the time we finish, we would have exhausted our whole time. But if your slides are simple and short enough, you can use less than the 45 minutes. That's just the time frame for the presentation. It can be less than that. It can be less than that. So any question today? No question today. There was no discussion. I will end here for all of you. I think it's quite early, so you cannot refresh and prepare for your next class. So if there are no questions, I'll see you again, God willing, next week. If there are questions too, I'm listening. Any question? Okay, all right. So let's enjoy our week. Bye bye.
Bye, Doc.